Are we live? Good morning. مساء الخير. مساء الخير في الشرق الأمريكي، مساء الخير في لندن، مساء الخير في لبنان وفي فلسطين. أهلا وسهلا بكم. We welcome you here and to discuss a very important issue. A year has passed since the beginning of the latest attack on Palestine and Lebanon by Israel, and the unbelievable genocide that is going on. As has been our habit, on behalf of the Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association, that is the main sponsor of the event, and I'll share with you who are the rest of the sponsors. We will begin with a land acknowledgement by one of our faculty members, and my name is Rabab Abdelhadi, and I will ask my colleague to introduce herself and go on with the land acknowledgement first. My colleague, Dr. Akhila.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akila Anand. We want to acknowledge that we gather as the California Faculty Association on the traditional land of the California Indian people, past and present. We honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. This calls us to commit to continuing to learn how to be better stewards of the land we inhabit as well. To recognize the land as an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose territory we reside on, and a way of honoring the indigenous people who have been living and working on the land from time immemorial. It is important to understand the long history that has brought us to reside on the land of the California Indian people, and to seek to understand our place within that history. Land acknowledgements do not exist in a past tense or historical context. Colonialism is a current and ongoing process, and we need to build our mindfulness of our present participation. The California Indian people are very much a part of today's California, living and working and caring for the land as they always have done. Acknowledging the land is an important Indigenous protocol that we are honoring here today. To find the native lands on which you reside, you can visit the website https://native-land.ca. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Akhila. And Dr. Akhila and Anath, you are on which campus of California State University?
I am here at Cal State LA on Tongva land.
Thank you. And I will go over the land acknowledgement from my own university. I am from San Francisco State University, and my university sits on the lands of the California, of the indigenous people of the Ohlone and Ramaytush indigenous people, and this land is stolen, unceded, and it remains theirs. And the student, faculty, and staff of the university benefit from the occupation of the land, and we have a responsibility to not only bring this experience into our discussions on imperialism and occupation, but make a commitment to defeat settler colonial project and have a commitment to return for the land back to its original owners and inhabitants. And I make this acknowledgement as an indigenous Palestinian Arab Muslim woman of color, feminist and activist, whose land is colonized by Israeli settler colonialism, and where it is essential for anyone who comes to visit or lives on the indigenous land of Palestine, all of Palestine, to not only acknowledge whose land it is, but that no matter how short or long a stay they have, and no matter how good or noble their intentions, the fact remains that they reside on Palestinian land, and their presence must be validated by indigenous Palestinians if they wish to not be recognized as settlers. I want to move now to my colleague, Dr. Tomomi Kanakawa from California State University, who will share with us the interruption statement that is a tradition of California Faculty Association, our union, to engage in our all meetings and activities. Please go ahead, Dr. Kanakawa.
Yes, I read the interruption statement. As part of our continuing commitment to racial justice work, when we experience examples of racial narratives, racism, or whiteness in our meetings, or as we conduct our business, we will address it. This means we can interrupt the meeting and draw the issue to one another's attention. We will do this kindly, with care, and in good faith. Further, as we engage interruptions, we will take an intersectional approach, reflecting the fact that white supremacy and racism operate in tandem with interlocking systems of oppression of colonialism, racial capitalism, class, cis heteropatriarchy, and ableism. This statement is a reminder that we commit to do this in the service of ending the system of racial oppression.
Thank you, Dr. Kinakawa. And as I mentioned, that this interruption statement, we have decided to adopt it in order for us to continuously engage with the struggle against racism and against all forms of repression, because we do not believe that because we have a union and we are organizing against management and for labor rights, we have achieved the justice for everything. So we have to remind ourselves that we are part and parcel of that struggle. I want to take a moment in your name and everybody's to honor, to salute and honor the fallen, the thousands of Palestinians who have been killed, the children, mothers, fathers, the disappeared, the injured, the people who lost their homes, who have no food. And while the genocide continues now against our people from Palestine to Lebanon, this moment of silence honors all the martyrs who fell also in the streets of the United States, South Africa, Puerto Rico, Kashmir, Congo, Sudan, and anywhere and everywhere around the world. We remember the martyrs who have fallen and the martyrs who continue to fall, and we remember our ancestors from whom we receive our inspiration, and we carry the struggle on forward and whose shoulders we stand. I want to express our gratitude for everybody who has participated in making this event a success. First of all, our colleagues who are members of the Palestine Arab Muslim Caucus of the California Faculty Association. We started the caucus 2 years ago, maybe 2.5 years ago, and we have grown to over 100 members in less than 2.5 years. And so we are very active. We are doing a lot of activities, and we can share them with you as we move along. We also have other co-sponsors, and I'm trying to find them in my notes because some things have changed. Let me go on. Well, first is my, alphabetically speaking, is my own program, the Arab and Muslim Ethnicities and Diaspora Studies program at San Francisco State University. The Black Lives Matter, Los Angeles, and our colleague Dr. Milina Abdullah is going to be speaking and analyzing, and she's also the vice presidential candidate in the United States. We have Right to Education campaign at Birzeit University, Palestine. We have the Institute for the Critical Study of Zionism that has commemorated, actually will commemorate in 3 days, its first year anniversary, going strong and continuing to struggle. We have the Center for the Study for Muslim and Arab Words. We have the National Students for Justice in Palestine. And as you know the encampments on campuses all over has been very going strong despite all the repression. And we have teaching Palestine pedagogical praxis and the indivisibility of justice and Westchester for Palestine and many, many other organizations whose slogans did not make it into the flyer. We are now, I want to also thank the people who have specifically been working on this particular panel. I want to thank my colleague, Dr. Akhila Anat. I want to thank the members of this group, Dr. Ahlam Muhtasib, Dr. Tumomi Kanakawa, and Dr. Akhila, and Dr. Julia Valante. I also want to thank soon to be doctor, maybe in 2 years, Laith Ghuloom. I would like you to introduce yourself, Laith. I also want to thank Aline Asiri, who is a student who graduated from American University of Beirut. She has left us now to go check on friends who in Beirut whose area has just been bombed, and they have been amazingly supportive with the tech and everything else. And later, you want to introduce yourself since you're here?
Sure. Hi,
Sure.
my name is Leith Ghuloom. I'm a doctoral student at University of Minnesota, Gender Women Sexuality Studies. I'll be helping with just tech support, so I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you, Laith. Okay, so we today marks, well, when Monday was the first year anniversary of the October 7th attack by the Hamas and other Palestinian resistance group on Israeli various military, especially on the Gaza base and various instructions. And soon thereafter, Israel began its invasion and its military attack and its genocide against Gaza. And today we mark over 40,000, officially over 40,000 Palestinian martyrs, almost 100,000 injured, thousands of buildings that have been destroyed. We are unable to actually predict how many people have been killed, how many people have been injured, because there are many people who are disappeared under the rubble of Gaza. We know that the 6 universities in Gaza have all been destroyed. We know that there are buildings and there are historical uh, um, historical places of Gaza that has been destroyed, thus destroying even the cultural historical roots of Palestine. The Lancet study puts the number of the dead at 186,000 people. We know that there are 902 families completely erased. There is not a single member of the family that remains. We know that there are over 1,300 families that there is only one member left, maybe a child, maybe a mother, maybe a father. That's it. One number. This is as of this past week. Maybe on Sunday the statistics were released. The health situation is abominable. There are 640,000 children that are awaiting the second dose of vaccination for polio. There is not clean water everywhere. Everybody is suffering from famine. There isn't sufficient food. There isn't sufficient medicine. And many people in Gaza are suffering from skin diseases. There are almost half the population in Gaza is displaced. Israeli military keeps issuing orders for people to move from one area to the other, and then they bomb the area that has been declared safe again and again and again. And the bombing is using a very dangerous bombs that is not even allowed in the law of war, international law of war. Multiple violations that have been declared even in the law of war illegal and crime of war has led to the International Court of Justice to declare that this defined the conditions of genocide, and that Israel occupation also is illegal and must end immediately. And many countries have already joined South Africa that sued Israel. We know that Cuba, yesterday, 2 days ago, Bolivia joined, Colombia, Brazil, many other countries have already joined. And so more and more of the international community, the United Nations General Assembly issued another resolution demanding that Israel withdraws. Israel has been are you hearing me?
Mhm.
Okay, because I see myself frozen. Israel has been called upon by everybody. The only country in the world that is expressing concern over human losses, but refused to stop the arms shipments to Israel is the United States. It's a country that we are in here today, and that has to stop the shipment of arms. So, and aside from this situation, we decided that it's really important for us to, as educators, as activists, as people who are living in this community, as people whose dollars, tax dollars, are being used to subsidize this genocide, to have a panel to understand what is going on in today in Palestine, what is going on in Lebanon, and what is happening, what do we need to do in our own campuses, and what do we need to do as people living in this country. We invited uh, four very amazing speakers: Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, who served for a very long time in Gaza as a surgeon. He was there at the height of the bombings, destruction of hospitals, has reported that he had to amputate limbs of people, sometimes using vinegar, because there was no longer anesthetic available in Gaza. He was reporting almost every day from various hospitals, and it was heartbreaking, his reporting from Gaza. He is now in Lebanon, and he has just left us a message saying that two areas in Beirut have been bombed, and he had been called to go immediately right away to help with the injured. So I said, please excuse us. If I'm able to come back and join you, I will. But if I'm not, please express my apologies to the people on the panel and the people who are listening, because I really have to go help as a surgeon. And Dr. Abu Sitte, when he went to England, he was appointed as the rector of Glasgow University. And many Zionist groups protested because he has dared to practice his humanitarian role and his the oath that he pledged as a doctor to help patients in Gaza, but it didn't work. He's still the educator and the doctor he trained to do. The next panelist we invited is Ms. Lama Ghoshe, who is a journalist, a writer, a prisoner, freed Palestinian prisoner. I don't want to say former, a freed Palestinian woman prisoner. She's from Jerusalem, and she has been arrested several times in and out. I don't want to tell Lama's narrative, because she will share it with us, what has happened to her, her conditions, and her life. And then the next speaker is going to be Ms. Rania Khaliq, who is a journalist, an activist, an organizer. She is now on Breakthrough News, but she has done many other, and she also has her own interviews, and she's from Lebanon, and she will share with us the latest of what's happening in Lebanon. She also discusses situation in the region. And last but not least, our own colleague, Dr. Melina Abdullah, who is a faculty member at CSU, who is also an activist with Black Lives Matter in LA, who is a vice presidential candidate, along with Dr. Cornel West, running running a campaign for justice and peace, unlike the two main presidential candidates in the two main dominating parties. And she has been organizing all sorts of things along while she's been teaching and educating the future generations. So we will be hearing from everybody and hoping that we will be able to get a colleague from Gaza if they are able to join and if they're able to get the internet. So we will start with the discussion, and we'll have 10 minutes from every guest, and then we will be able to take another round with the guests, and then we will open it up for you and for the guests to interact with each other and with you in the audience. Please post all your comment, all your questions in the chat, and our colleagues, we will be looking at them and direct them towards the participants. So we will start with Lama, if you don't mind, and actually we'll start with Rania to just give us a short maybe news about what just happened in Beirut, and maybe what's going on in Gaza, and we will not count it on you from your 10 minutes. If you can just give us a news bulletin.
Well,
Please go.
in Lebanon, Israel has been widening its circle of targets. I mean, obviously Israel is carpet bombing South Lebanon and is attempting to invade the country, and has also been relentlessly targeting the suburb of South Beirut. But they've been widening their circle, and for the third time since the start in the last few weeks, they just hit central Beirut, and this time they actually took out an entire residential building, and which is why Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta, as you said, had to go, because it happened just before we started. And from what I understand, there's many casualties from that attack. As you can imagine, there's people under the rubble, people being pulled out. It's just completely horrifying. This is, of course, supposed to be a safe area of Beirut. So like I said, they're widening the circle, and each time they push the envelope, it's pretty clear they're trying to test and see if the international community will have an issue with it. And each time that they don't, they go even further. Today, Israel also attacked a UNIFIL watchtower and injured several UN peacekeepers at the border in the south of Lebanon. And this is after using them as human shields for several days in their attempted invasion of Lebanon in the south. And again, they just test it. They test the envelope. They see, is anyone going to care if we're kind of firing at UN people? No, let's now injure some of them and see what happens. I mean, France is demanding an explanation, but it's hardly condemning it or restricting weapons sales to Israel. And this is exactly what we saw in Gaza. And of course, in Gaza, as we've all seen, horrifying calls for help from North Gaza. Specifically, Israel's attempting to kill everyone in North Gaza. For several days now, North Gaza has been under complete siege, more than just the rest of Gaza, because they want to empty it out. They are forcing everybody in hospitals to evacuate and then shooting them when they evacuate. They're literally just using humans at this point as target practice and killing them all. And I'm sure all of us are watching the pleas for help and just feel completely helpless, because again, the world is sitting on its hands. The international community is sitting on its hands. And I know we're going to talk about it more, but of course, then anybody who attempts to stand up to this extermination, whether it's in Gaza or whether now it has been extended to Lebanon, is labeled a terrorist. So it's quite the narrative they've framed. But anyways, I'm going to stop there because I know that this is not my speaking time, but that's just a quick update on what's happening.
Thank you so much, Rania, for this update. So we will go now with the panel, and then we will come back and see if there are new news updates, because the situation keeps changing and it's really horrifying. Lama, can you please tell us welcome, Awashi, and thank God that you are not in prison right now, because like we were always worried when we talk to somebody to see are they in or are they out all the time, because we know that the Israeli military continuously imprison people. So we would like you to share with us your own story, the conditions of Palestinian prisoners as you experience them. Talk about your own situation, Palestinian women prisoners, how you're a Jerusalemite and an artist, a journalist. How did that work? How did situations of prison change after the genocide? And if you miss any of these things, we'll remind you to speak. So go ahead, please, and welcome. You're muted, Lama Habibti. No, we can't hear you. It doesn't look like your mic is off, but we can't hear you.
Now
Okay,
you
now
hear me?
I think you're good. Yeah.
Okay. So I said thank you, Dr. Rabao, and good evening for all of you. Actually, I'm here to speak on behalf of more than 170 Palestinian journalists who have been martyred in Gaza since October 7, 2023. I'm also here to speak on behalf of journalists detained in the Israeli occupation prisons. I'm here to speak on behalf of all journalists who have been martyred in the West Bank, occupied Jerusalem, and the occupied interior, foremost among them the martyred journalist Shireen Abu Akleh. Also, I'm here to represent all journalists who have been subjected to a systematic campaign of intimidation and silencing by Israeli colonialism, not only since October 7th, but for over 76 years. Journalism today in occupied Palestine is a profession of death, without exaggeration. So, as you before you as a journalist head to the field to cover an event, you are forced to bid farewell to your family and your children, as the likelihood of death or arrest is very high. Personally, journalism is more than just a profession from which I earn my living. It is a national duty and a humanitarian and ethical obligation towards the Palestinian cause. I work to convey the narratives and voices of marginalized groups, especially the martyrs and prisoners, particularly in occupied Jerusalem. And it seems that this displeased the authorities of Zionist colonialism as they began to purpose and target my voice. So today I'm speaking to you from the heart of occupied Jerusalem, particularly from Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood. Jerusalem, a city where its inhabitants are subjected to repression and prevented from speaking and expressing themselves freely. It's a city where its owners are silenced under the pretext of a colonial political law that has been enacted to control the voices of Palestinians and suppress their narratives, known as the incitement law. Because of this law, thousands of Palestinians are currently in the prison of the Israeli occupation, and because of it, I, working as a journalist, have experienced three levels of imprisonment since of my arrest on September 4, 2022. To this day, my case remains unresolved and pending. I experienced actual imprisonment after being transferred to Hasharon prison in occupied Haifa in the north of Palestine, where I was subjected to strip search and placed in solitary confinement within a criminal section filled with inmates. During that time, I was sexually harassed by criminal prisoners, and my privacy was completely violated by the presence of three cameras in the cell, one of which was positioned above the toilet. Later, a decision was made to release me under the condition of house arrest or home detention with an order prohibiting contact and communication. I remained confused to my family's home for 10 continuous months. This despicable colonial punishment has been inherited by Zionist settler colonialism from the British mandate and continues to be used against Palestinians to this day. Simply put, this punishment turns a family member into a warden who monitors you within your home. In my case, my father and my mother, and actually my parents, were turned into my jailers. It effectively transforms all innate human emotions within the family, such as love, fear, and attachment, into tools of control, domination, and colonial surveillance imposed upon you. It's important to note that this is not legally recognized as punishment, meaning it merely robs Palestinians of their lives. However, the final stage was the official punishment that this colonial state imposed on me, referred to as the imprisonment of society, uh, namely humiliating forced labor. The Zionist court sentenced me to forced labor in the laundry room of a Zionist nursing home located within an Israeli settlement for a during of 9 months. And after I began working, actually, it was decided to suspend the execution of this punishment without any clear reason, and I was returned to court once again to decide my case. In summary, 2 years have passed since the moment of my last arrest, and I have not been officially punished yet. My story reflects the situation of Palestinians in Jerusalem and the terrorists occupied in 1948, and it embodies the conditions of 95 Palestinian female prisoners currently held in the Mouni prison in occupied Haifa, who are subjected to all forms of violent and systematic colonial oppression, a lack of food, resources, absence of health care, overcrowded cells, deprivation of family and lawyer visits, as well as ongoing strip searches and sexual threats. All of them resist the policies of death and live in hope of nearby freedom. It's important to say that genocide has not only occurred in Gaza or throughout Palestine, it has happened and continues to happen within prisons. It's a systematic extermination of the bodies and souls of Palestinian prisoners, uh, ultimating all forms of physical and psychological torture without any controls or limits. It's a visible genocide happening in the 21st century in full view of the entire world. This genocide did not begin on October 7th. It's a permanent and ongoing action that started since the Nakba of 1948 and has continued to reach its peak in the ongoing war since October 2023. And during my personal experience, I discovered my own tools of resistance and resilience. The most prominent of which are drawing and writing. I painted 30 pieces that document my personal journey and prepared an exhibition titled A Mother Under House Arrest to transform my experience from an individual one into a collective experience that creates collective awareness about the mechanism of resisting this type of punishment. In the end, I would like to say freedom for Palestine, freedom for the prisoners of Palestine, and healing for the wounded, and mercy for the martyrs. And I ask you all to raise your voices for Palestine.
Thank you so much, Lema. There are so many questions that we would want to ask you, and like on my mind alone, and with other, with like from I'm sure from our other speakers, and also from people who are participating with us. We are very much involved in prison abolition, and we are very much involved in collaboration on prison abolition between prisoners here in the US and in Palestine. We have had a lot of work around that. And there are some issues that you brought up that it would be really helpful to get elaboration around that. You said the last thing you said, mother under house arrest. So you didn't say anything about motherhood. So maybe that would be something that you can talk about. Maybe you can elaborate in the second round about this whole question of working in the settlement. Why? How are you as a what does it mean to kind of like be in solitary confinement? How does this work? You talked about genocide inside prison. Maybe you can elaborate a little bit about that and the whole question of sexual harassment and that happens in prison. So we can discuss that when we come back. And then you mentioned Sheikh Jarrah casually. So maybe we can also have a discussion about that. And I understand you're a student, graduate from Birzeit University. You graduated from Birzeit University, am I correct? Yeah. So maybe we can go back to that because one of the people who nominated you was from the Right to Education campaign. So you were also involved with that. But let's come back to that and have that discussion. Maybe my also colleagues have questions. But let's move to Ms. Rania Khaliq and discuss, maybe elaborate on the conditions in Lebanon now and how do they relate to the genocide in Gaza And what first now, and then maybe walk a little bit to the past. I mean, Lama said that the genocide and the whole situation did not start on October 7th, even though the whole world seems to realize that there is an issue, not the whole world, but a lot of people on October 7th. And also maybe talk about the relationship between the Lebanese and the Palestinians historically. And we save the discussion of the media till later on. Go ahead, please.
Okay, so yeah, let me go through some of the things I had wanted to discuss here, which you mentioned some of them. Just to point out, I actually live in Lebanon, but I left a few weeks ago to cover the UN General Assembly in New York for Breakthrough News, and that was just before the pager attacks. So now I'm still in the States right now. And I've spent the last few weeks just watching from afar as Israel expands its genocide into southern Lebanon and into South Beirut and the Bekaa. And so far, Israel has displaced 1.2 million people in Lebanon and killed over 2,000. And, Lebanon is a very tiny country. It just has a bit under 6 million people. So that's over 1/6 of the population has been displaced. And I'll get to the importance of that on a number of levels. But, that's on top of a year of genocide in Gaza that has probably killed hundreds of thousands of Palestinians. We don't know the actual toll. And of course, Israel has not relented. And now the Israeli regime is about to expand its psychotic expansionist war again with the backing of the sociopaths in charge of the US against Iran. So let's talk a bit about Lebanon. Like I said, I live in Beirut, Lebanon, where every day for the last year, since October 7th, we've heard Israeli threats of genocide, that they plan to take Lebanon back to the Stone Age, that they want to copy and paste Gaza onto Lebanon, that they want to invade, ethnically cleanse, and colonize southern Lebanon as they have in the past and make it part of greater Israel. And they recently escalated in an attempt to do just that. And the reason they hadn't been able to before was because Lebanon has a very strong resistance. Hezbollah, which has repeatedly defeated Israel, it liberated Lebanese land, and continues to defend Lebanon's borders, which is why the U.S. labels Hezbollah a terrorist group. Now, Hezbollah, as I think most people here probably know, was formed in the mid-1980s to fight Israel's vicious occupation of southern Lebanon following its invasion and siege of Beirut that Ronald Reagan, of all people, referred to as a Holocaust because it was so vicious. And years and years, Hezbollah fought the Israelis. It's Lebanese people who picked up arms against invaders and occupiers, and liberated their land in South Lebanon in 2000, pushed out the Israelis again in an attempted invasion in 2006, and they've protected the country ever since. Even now, they're protecting the country as Israel unleashes hell on Lebanon. So how did this current round start? Hezbollah chose on October 8th to intervene against Israel's genocide in Gaza by firing at an Israeli military installation in the Shabaa Farms, which is Israeli-occupied Lebanese land. And since then, there was this kind of tit for tat between Israel and Hezbollah that was constantly expanding, but quite slowly, and was mostly confined to the border areas. I mean, and in many ways, you could argue Hezbollah was doing what you are supposed to do, according to the Geneva Convention on Genocide, which is to punish the crime of genocide to make it stop. They were putting pressure on the Israelis as a support front for Gaza. And this is also while the entire Western world has been backing Israel's genocide. The only people who've tried to stop it materially have been Hezbollah, the Yemeni group Ansar Allah, more commonly known as the Houthis, the Iraqi resistance forces, and more recently, the Iranians. These are the only groups and countries who have dared to stand up against Israel's genocide materially. Another calculation of Hezbollah was that if Israel destroys Gaza, Lebanon is next. Well, now Lebanon is next. The Israelis are carpet bombing South Beirut and South Lebanon every single day, and they've killed over 2,000 people, and they're currently trying to invade Lebanon. And Hezbollah is retaliating by expanding their firing range of missiles to displace more Israeli settlers in the north, and they're fighting to stop the invasion and reoccupation of southern Lebanon. And I just want to emphasize, Lebanon's future security hinges on Hezbollah's performance in the south. The Israelis and the Americans are totally they're basically drunk on victory right now. And as a result, they're, I think, a bit delusional. They think that because they murdered Hassan Nasrallah with 85 2,000-pound U.S. supplied bunker buster bombs that killed hundreds of people in residential buildings in Dahi, the area of South Beirut that Israel keeps pummeling. They think that because of this, Hezbollah's finished. And The loss of senior military leaders in Hezbollah is certainly a huge loss. There's no question about that. But Hezbollah is still a strong organization. It has regrouped, it has rearmed. It is firing over 100 missiles a day at Israel while stopping the invasion so far. But make no mistake, the Americans are in the driver's seat. They tricked everyone with fake promises of a ceasefire in mid-September, much like they did with Gaza, while privately greenlighting Israel's escalation to all-out war in Lebanon. And now, while the Israelis militarily try to destroy Hezbollah, weaken the country, the U.S. is squeezing the country politically, demanding a president be appointed in Lebanon to their liking to force Hezbollah out of the Lebanese government, despite the fact that Hezbollah, its leadership, was elected to serve in the largest political bloc in the Lebanese parliament. There was elections just in 2022. So this is not the U.S. trying to install, quote unquote, democracy. This is the U.S. trying to overthrow democracy. And in many ways, this is the 1982 script all over again. Netanyahu, in a statement to the Lebanese just 2 days ago, he gave the Lebanese an ultimatum. He said, either kill each other in a civil war that attacks Hezbollah, or Israel will turn Lebanon into Gaza. And the U.S. and Israel's fascist Lebanese allies, the Lebanese forces in Kataib and their media stations, are jumping to serve their imperialist masters in Washington, D.C. by inciting sectarian hate against displaced Lebanese Shias. And I want to remind everyone, these are the same people who carried out numerous massacres, including the Sabra and Shatila massacres. They hate Palestinians. They hate any Lebanese who are different from or disagree with them. And, these are the people who want Lebanon to be a sectarian Christian state that normalizes with the sectarian Jewish settler state. They want to hand over southern Lebanon to the Israelis. And this is part of a historical colonial divide and rule attempt in Lebanon that started with the French and has continued with the Americans and with the Israelis. But I just want to also say, where does the U.S. fit into this? We need to understand Israel as a reflection of, not a deviation from, the U.S. Sometimes people think it seems the U.S. has gone crazy. They're willing to destroy the very world order they worked so hard to create, all to protect Israeli apartheid and Israel's ability to commit genocide. So it's important to talk about what the U.S. gains here, because this isn't Israel running the show. The U.S. is in the driver's seat. It's a team effort. We know that Israel is their weapon in the Middle East and even beyond. Israel's always participated in U.S. dirty wars around the global South, doing some of the U.S.'s dirty work that they don't want their hands on. That's why they arm Israel to destroy Gaza, to bomb Lebanon, to kill Iranian nuclear scientists, to arm fascists in Latin America, to mow down international law. It's all to secure American interests in the region and around the world. And we know global North leaders are racist. They don't see Palestinians, Arabs, Muslims, the jungle people of the global South, in the words of Joseph Borrell, they don't see them as human. But I think the most important factor in their support for these crazy Israeli escalations is what October 7th meant to the Western imperialist project. What Palestinians did in the Al-Aqsa flood operation struck fear into the hearts of Western leaders. Palestinians broke out of their cage. It was akin to a slave revolt. And as history has shown, no slave revolt goes unpunished. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and Ursula von der Leyen do not take kindly to indigenous people in the so-called jungle shooting at their precious garden, and Israel is one of their gardens. The West is backing the Gaza onslaught as part of a genocidal drive against the oppressed people of the global South. They're sending a message that this is what happens if you strike back militarily at their rotten colonial, capitalist, imperialist system. Israel versus Gaza is the imperialist West versus the global South. The imperialists have created a world where a small group of ruling elites led by the US very effectively steal from the global South to maintain their hoarded wealth. If this system collapses, they lose everything. That's why they sanction over 30% of the world. It's why they overthrow governments, invade and collapse misbehaving countries. It's why they kill babies in incubators, destroy hospitals, and create famine. They literally shorten lifespans as a matter of policy. And the genocide in Gaza is a microcosm of how far they're willing to go. Look no further than their willingness to risk nuclear war with Russia and China to see just how psychopathic their ambitions are. But I also want to remind everyone, because this also sounds so overwhelming and daunting, it's important not to become defeatist, because we have to remember that despite the horrific losses and the disgusting atrocity we've witnessed across Gaza, now extending into Lebanon, Israel has not achieved a single military objective. Hamas is still fighting. Hezbollah will keep fighting. The entire region is basically firing weapons at the Israelis. It's unprecedented. So just to summarize, Israel is doing exactly what the U.S. wants it to do. It's attacking any force that fights against U.S. domination of the region. Hamas, Hezbollah, Iran, the Iraqis, the Yemenis, these forces refuse to submit to Western domination. They refuse to be slaves to the US. And for that, they are being punished with extreme depravity by a US empire that is slowly waning in power, but will do an insane amount of damage on its way down. Israel is the US's greatest asset. It's its biggest investment in policing its adversaries. And that's why the liberation of Palestine is a requirement for the liberation of the region and honestly for much of the third world, because the liberation of Palestine will mean the dismantling of a genocidal apartheid regime that destroys for the US. A liberated Palestine means a weakened US empire and therefore a world that has a fighting chance. So just all that's to say, our futures are connected, whether we're in Palestine, whether we're in Lebanon, or whether we're in the imperial core. If we're not a part of that 1% ruling class, we're just a part of the oppressed masses. We're just in a different part of the hierarchy. But what happens in Palestine doesn't stay there. This is a lens into the future of what they will do to all of their adversaries, and that includes us. So all that's to say, the liberation of Palestine is crucial to anybody in the world who wants to live in a better world and not the dark one that Israel's creating.
Thank you so much, Rania. We have tons of questions for you, and I've been writing aside. I want to turn now over to Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah, I was wondering if you can, first of all, analyze what you are. You're an analyst, you are an educator. So if you can comment, analyze what's going on, and then maybe discuss what do you think about the U.S. response to the genocide on Gaza in the street and in the official government, and if you would like to talk now about the encouraging signs, or if you want to talk about them in the next round, we could do either one, and what needs to happen, including the Black Lives Matter and any other movement you'd like to discuss, please.
Sure. Well, thank you so much. Salam alaikum. And thank you for having me. Thank you to everybody who's contributing to this conversation, and more than the conversation, to action, to make sure that we free Palestine. And by freeing Palestine, remember that we are freeing all of ourselves. And I really appreciate the grounding that we open up with as the California Faculty Association. And as I talk about Black solidarity with the Palestinian people, want to also ground ourselves in the tremendous commitment and sacrifice that African people have made all around the world and in this country as well. So I want to offer some words and invite us all to take a deep breath in and breathe out. We pay homage to those who were stolen from Africa, placed in bondage, falsely named as chattel, and forced into labor, who were called slaves but never submitted as such, who have always been fully human, with an unbroken connection to the divine and to each other. We honor our African ancestors for the still unpaid labor which built what is now the Americas. And so for me, as a Black woman living in this country, it's really important that we uplift that, because I think it's at the heart of why Black people, especially Black people in the United States, have the greatest level when they measure which groups have the greatest level of solidarity with Palestinian people. It's been Black people in the United States who've both spoken the greatest level of solidarity, but also engaged in solidarity actions. So if you look at the front lines, we know that Black students are overrepresented on the front lines of things like Students for Justice in Palestine and campus actions. We know that Black people all around the world, and especially in the United States, have been engaging and understand our fights to run parallel. So the genocide in Palestine feels very familiar to Black people, not just because we're also experiencing genocides in Sudan and the Congo and Haiti and places where Black people are the targets of these corporate-driven imperialist genocides, but also because we know that the genocides of Black people all around the world is part of the history of expanded colonialism and imperialism globally. And so as we talk about the 1-year anniversary of this iteration of genocide in Palestine, I'm very proud to say that we're also talking about the 1-year anniversary of the resistance to that genocide, right? That we did not, and we have not, and we will not submit to oppression. We will resist. And that's been the legacy of Black people, is resistance. And so Black Lives Matter grassroots, which is the boots on the ground that Black Lives Matter is globally. So there's a lot that's been said. And in fact, I think it's appropriate to say here that the Black Lives Matter Global Network Foundation, which if you're following, you should immediately unfollow. That is BLK Lives Matter on social media. That's actually been hijacked and is being run by a Black Zionist who goes by the name of Shalomia Bowers. So if you see terrible things that come out of BLK Lives Matter, it's because that movement has been hijacked. Those platforms and those resources were hijacked by someone who is actually a Zionist himself. It's why there was a recent tweet that sounds like it was written by AIPAC. It's because we don't know to what degree they're in alliance with AIPAC and other organizations that fund and fuel genocide. So BLK Lives Matter is not Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter, which is the boots on the ground, which does work on front lines, is represented by BLM Grassroots. BLM Grassroots is our national and global formation of the real work of the movement. And so that's the organization that I'm with and that I represent. And we want to encourage you as we rebuild after our resources were stolen to follow BLM Grassroots on all social media. And I'm lifting that up, not because we want more followers, although we do, because that's how we get our words out and get our message out. But I'm lifting that up because as BLM Grassroots on October 9th, we were the first Black organization to issue a statement of solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I'm just going to read that. And then I'm going to talk a little bit, if that's okay, Rabab, about why this work is so important. So
Please go ahead.
Thank you. So Black Lives Matter Grassroots stands in solidarity with our Palestinian family who are currently resisting 76 years of settler colonialism and apartheid. As Black people continuing to fight to end militarism and mass incarceration in our own communities, let us understand the resistance in Palestine as an attempt to tear down the gates of the world's largest open-air prison. As a radical Black organization grounded in abolitionist ideals, we see clear parallels between Black and Palestinian people. We too understand what it means to be surveilled, dehumanized, property seized, families separated, our people criminalized and slaughtered with impunity, locked up in droves. And when we resist, they call us terrorists. We too dream of a world where our people may live freely on decolonized land. May the borders, checkpoints, prisons, police, and watch lists that terrorize our communities crumble. And may the world we build from their ashes honor those who have fallen in struggle. For lasting peace to come, the entire apartheid system must be dismantled. The war on the Palestinian people must cease. We call for the United States government to immediately stop funding war and read the $4 billion we now, and from the Israeli military to repair the damage caused by US-backed wars, military airstrikes, coups, and destabilizing interventions against oppressed people around the world. So that was the statement that we issued the morning of October 9th. Since then, we've issued a recent statement at the start of the school year to support student protests and demand a free Palestine. We've developed a toolkit called Black Times Palestine. We've engaged in marches, which Sister Alam was a part of, Black Times Palestine March, recognizing that the genocide of the Palestinian people, again, mirrors the genocide that Black people have been experiencing all around the world and in the United States as well. And so for us, it's imperative that we continue to rise up. One of the things that we've often talked about is Black people being a moral compass in this world. And we have to fight genocide because it's the right thing to do. We have to fight genocide because one of the things for which I'm most grateful is that even in the midst of some of the most horrific attacks experienced in global history, I come from a people whose hearts have not been hardened and whose spirits haven't been stolen. And so I used to apologize for shedding tears when we think about the 100,000 people at minimum who've been killed in Palestine. I used to apologize when I would talk about the Black people who are constantly killed at the hands of police in this country and at the hands of the state. Thinking about people like Imam Khalifa, also known as Marcellus Williams, who was viciously executed despite his factual innocence almost 2 weeks ago. I used to apologize for my tears, but now I celebrate my tears because my tears, our tears, are also resistance. They're a reminder. They're reminders to ourselves and to each other that although they, and by they, I mean white supremacist patriarchal capitalism, I mean global imperialism, I mean colonialism and neo-colonialism, I mean Zionism, although they try to dehumanize us, our tears are resistance, and they remind us that we are still fully human and we will resist by asserting our humanity. And so Black people have been a moral compass. And also, we have to resist because every dollar that's spent on genocide and war lines the pockets of war profiteers like Boeing, war profiteers that steal money from the people. Every dollar that's spent means that we don't have dollars to use to help the people in North Carolina recover. It means that we don't have dollars to house our people, to feed our people. It means that those dollars are not used to make sure that we have free education from pre-K through PhD, as is the promise of the university system for which I work. And so we have to resist with everything that we have in us. And I know we only have 10 minutes, and so I'm going to close here. We have to resist with our hearts. In my faith, I'm Muslim. In my faith, we're taught that we have to struggle for justice. Justice is one of the 99 names of Allah. And we have to resist. We have to struggle for justice, and we have to believe in our hearts. But we also have to speak with our tongues. But there's also a third way. We have to also show with our deeds. And whether you are Muslim or not, whether you're a believer or not, Whether you are Muslim or Christian or a non-believer of any faith, you're not a believer at all. Humanity and the universe calls us to be our highest selves and says that we have to believe in our hearts, we have to speak with our tongues, and most importantly, we have to show with our deeds, and we have to engage in constant resistance from wherever we are. As organizers, as mamas, I also am a mama of 3 children. We have to create a world that's fit for their inhabitants and for the inheritance of future generations. So again, thank you so much for calling us together and for renewing our commitment for a free Palestine and a free world.
Thank you, Dr. Abdullah, and thank you for being an active member of the PAM caucus and being very involved in it, as well as involved in our all activities as educators, supporting our students, and actually way before even the most recent and before Black Lives Matter emerged. They were fighting on your campus, and I remember even signing petitions on your behalf. I didn't know you face to face. So this is not a new thing. This is a continuation of our struggles. So we were wondering, some of the people asked questions. So we will continue the conversation. So people ask questions about as we wait to hear news from Dr. Ghassar. We are hoping that there are not as many victims as unfortunately we expect. But we wanted to ask some questions, and I think okay. So there are questions for everybody. I will raise them, and then we will go and then we will move around. So there is a question for you, Lama, where people are asking information, where people can find stories of Palestinian captives. Some folks only know Prisoners Club, Nadil Asir. If you can provide some information. Also, the other questions that I wanted to ask, if you can elaborate a little bit more about being sentenced to serve in the settlements, because I personally didn't even know, and I work on support of prisoners for a very long time. And what did you, like you said, did not begin on October 7th, but many people are reporting that things got much worse after October 7th. If this is the case, why do you think that is the case? And the whole thing of what's going on in prisons itself. You said genocide, because we just saw, I think yesterday or the day before, Ben Gvir going into the prisons and like inspecting them, and there is much more like attack and search of prisoners and so on. So if you can just like shed some light on that, and we'll go over the questions one by one so people don't forget. Go ahead. Lama, are you frozen?
Actually, I'd like to answer in Arabic. It's more
Yeah, okay.
comfortable for me.
Lean, are you there to help me translate?
Yes, I'm here.
تمام.
Go ahead.
اوكي. كنت عم بقول انه الاباده الجماعيه لم تبدا في 7 أكتوبر بخصوص القضيه الفلسطينيه او حتى في السجون او في عموم فلسطين، ولكن خلينا نقول انه وتيره العنف ووتيره الاستهداف اللي عم تستخدمها الحكومه الاسرائيليه والاستعمار الاستيطاني الاسرائيلي بشكل عام هو اليوم الاوضح والاعنف والاكثر مباشرة، لأنه هذا تم تحفيزه بفعل 7 أكتوبر والهجوم اللي نفذته حركة المقاومة الإسلامية حماس. ولكن أنا بحب أوقف أكثر على خصوصية الفلسطينيين في القدس وفي الداخل، نظرا لأني أنا يعني جاي من هذه المحلات وبقدر أعبر عنها أكثر تحديدا ما بعد 2021.
وقفي. أنا بترجم هاي المرة والمرة الجاية بترجمي لين. Okay,
no problem.
Okay. Lama says that what she is saying is that the genocide She emphasized that the genocide that we saw did not start on October 7th, but the extent of it, the intensity of it, of the violence, of the targeting has become so much more. After October 7th, specifically because the Israeli government and the military were trying to vindicate what has happened by the Palestinian resistance on October 7th. Now she wants to focus on the whole question of Jerusalem, on the prisoners, on this situation, and Lean will be translated. What?
اوكي. هلا انا بفكر انه ما بعد الحرب اللي حصلت في عام 2021 او ما يعرف بهبة الكرامة، كان في هناك انتقال ملفت في حالة الوعي عند الفلسطينيين تحديدا في القدس وفي الداخل، وهذا انعكس على المستوى الميداني من خلال وجود الفلسطينيين في القدس وفي أراضي 48 على الميدان وفي المظاهرات بشكل واضح، ومن خلال أيضا المستوى الافتراضي. يعني صار الخطاب الفلسطيني والسردية الفلسطينية اللي عم تكون على السوشيال ميديا كثير أوضح، وصار الخطاب يوصل لحدود العالم بشكل أوضح. فما بعد ذلك وبعد هذا النوع من الصحوة اللي أحدثها الفلسطينيين واللي أحدثتها الحرب اللي كانت في عام 2021، صار في عنا منظومة الردع الإسرائيلية اشتغلت بشكل كبير لحتى تحاول تعمل على إعادة ضبط المشهد من خلال مجموعة من القوانين اللي تم استحداثها أو القوانين اللي موجودة في قانون الطوارئ في عام 1945 التابع للانتداب البريطاني، وأبرزها الاعتقال الإداري والحبس المنزلي، والقانون الآخر اللي هو قانون التحريض اللي هو تم استحداثه من قبل الحكومة الإسرائيلية. فمعظم الأفراد اللي تم إدخالهم للسجن ما بين 2021 ل 2024، عم بحكي بس في منطقة القدس والداخل أكثر إشي، هم تم إدخالهم بحجة تهمة التحريض، وهاي تهمة موجودة في القانون الإسرائيلي ويعاقب عليها ابتداء من 6 أشهر لمدة غير منتهية. بدك تترجمي لين؟
وقفي روح تفضلي.
Yes, thank you, Lama. So to summarize what you've said, Lama is saying that she can speak more to the experiences of Palestinians in the West Bank and Jerusalem, and she mentioned that after the 2021 uprising called the Habbat al-Karami or the Karama uprising, there was a heightened sense of awareness in Palestine, in the West Bank, in Jerusalem, and all over Palestine, even in virtual spaces. We've seen the Palestinian narrative everywhere. Also on the ground, we've seen more protests there. And so Israel responded to that, and we're working hard to kind of suppress the Palestinian narrative and to kind of break the spirits of the people on the streets. And this is when they started working on laws that they've inherited from the British Mandate also, like, for example, incitement laws. And they've been imprisoning a lot of active voices using this law. And it's kind of like from 6 months to كم حكيتي من 6 شهور
مدة مفتوحة. بس لين أنا عم بحكي عن القدس مش الويست بانك، يعني مش الضفة الغربية.
أوكي، جيروسلم.
جيروسلم، وكمان الفلسطينيين الموجودين في الأراضي المحتلة لعام 1948 اللي هم يسموا عرب الداخل بين قوسين يعني.
Yes, and the 1948 Palestinians who live inside what is now called Israel in the occupied lands.
اوكي. فمن هذاك الوقت وصولا ما بعد 7 من أكتوبر صار في عنا حالة أو اشتغلت منظومة الردع بشكل كبير جدا، بحيث أنه صار في عنا في منطقة القدس وفي الداخل حالة من الترهيب وحالة من الخوف لكل الناشطين، لكل الناشطات، أو حتى الأشخاص اللي بيكونوا متواجدين دائما في الميدان أو بيحكوا عن مواضيع الأسرى أو عن مواضيع الشهداء. ومنذ هذاك الوقت تم استهداف كل شخص بيحاول يعبر عن نفسه باستخدام وسائل التواصل الاجتماعي، بيحاول يحكي عن رأيه أو بيحاول إنه يساند أهل غزة أو يدعم أهل غزة بأي جملة بسيطة أو بأي شير لأي فيديو خاص بأهل غزة، بيتم استهدافه وتحويله لحالة جماعية أو جمعية تخلق نوع من الترهيب عند الجماعة، وذلك في سبيل إسكاتهم. أنا قضيتي بلشت في 2022، يعني قضيتي بلشت قبل 7 من أكتوبر وقبل بداية الحرب. ولكنها لا تزال مستمرة حتى هذه اللحظة. يعني بدأت ما بين الحرب ما قبل الأخيرة على غزة والحرب الأخيرة اللي هي من 2021 ل 2024. وأيضا التهمة كانت هي التحريض، بالرغم من أني أنا صحفية ومهمتي أن أقوم بالحديث ونقل أصوات وروايات الفلسطينيين، إلا أنه تم اتهامي بالتحريض والتماهي مع تنظيمات إرهابية وإدخالي للسجن واختباري أكثر من مستوى من العقوبات. Leon?
Okay, yes. So as Lama was discussing, Israel worked on, actively targeting the people who were vocal about what's happening, and also were vocal about Gaza, and also were vocal about Palestinian detainees and their situation in the Israeli prisons. They worked hard on targeting them and censoring them and using the incitement laws against them. Also, Lama mentioned that she was charged and imprisoned in 2022, before October 7, before what happened in Gaza right now. And she is a journalist, but despite this, she was charged with incitement. She was charged with being close to terrorist charges, right, Lama?
Yes.
Yes.
ولاحقا خلال مروري بالسجن الفعلي، يعني السجن وجودي بالسجن، بعدين الهوم ديتنشن او الهاوس ارست، اخر عقوبه اللي كنت عم تسالي عنها الدكتوره اللي هي عقوبه تسمى سجن المجتمع، وهي عمليا بديل عن السجن الفعلي. يعني هي حاله قانونيه بيتم تحويلك لها كبديل عن السجن الفعلي. في حالتي ولاني انا كمان كنت، يعني أنا أم ومسؤولة عن طفلين صغار، فتحولت لما يسمى بالفورست ليبر، اللي هو باللغة الإسرائيلية العبودات شروط، أو العمل الإجباري، العمل لصالح الجمهور. وطلب مني، بالرغم من أني مثلا أنا أعمل كصحفية وأنا طالبة ماجستير وكل هذه الأمور تم تحييدها، طلب مني أن أعمل في غرفة مغسلة حتى أقوم بغسل الثياب المتسخة الخاصة بالمسنين الإسرائيليين، المستوطنين الأوائل اللي قدموا على فلسطين في الأربعينيات وفي الخمسينيات وموجودين في هذا البيت. وهذا البيت موجود، بيت المسنين موجود في مستوطنة تسمى كريات مناحم، مستوطنة إسرائيلية، بمعنى كل اللي فيها والموجودين فيها هم صهاينة إسرائيليين. وكان مطلوب مني أني أنا أعمل كل يوم في بيت المسنين بواقع 6 ساعات ونصف في اليوم الواحد لمدة 9 شهور في داخل هذه الغرفة الخاصة بالغسيل. هذا النوع من العمل هو نوع من يعني من أعلى أنواع القهر اللي ممكن يستخدمها المستعمر اتجاه المستعمر، لحتى يحاول إنه هو يذله، يقهره، ويحاول إنه هو يفقد احترامه لنفسه ويحيد عن المبادئ اللي هو موجود فيها. والأهم من هيك إنه بعد ما تم فرض علي هذه العقوبة لمدة 9 شهور، وبدأت عمليا بتنفيذ هذه العقوبة في شهر 4 2024، يعني بعد بداية الحرب 7 من أكتوبر، قرروا توقيفي عن هذه العقوبة، وإني أنا لا أصلح للتواجد في هذه العقوبة بحجة إنه الأوضاع في الحرب جدا متوترة، وإنه التهمة اللي أنا موجودة علي اللي هي الإرهاب بتخليهم ما بدهم يعني موجودة في أي مكان إسرائيلي. وتم إرجاعي مرة جديدة للمحكمة لحتى يتم البت في قضيتي. فهذا النوع من العقوبات هو مستخدم في إسرائيل، وعادة لما بيتم استخدامه تجاه فلسطيني بيتم استخدامه بأعلى درجة معينة من القهر والتحقير لهذا الفلسطيني من خلال اختيار أماكن عمل مذلة له ولا يتم وضعه فيها. كثير حكيت.
لا مش مشكلة. So just to kind of summarize what was also added is that first initially Lama was put in prison, in Israeli prison, and then she was transferred to house arrest, and then after that she was asked to or transferred to forced labor. And what she was asked to do then, and she was forced, this was her punishment, is that she would go to a settlement in an elderly home, and she would be working in the laundry room. She worked for 6.5 hours she was yes, for 9 months, but she did 4 months before they stopped this charge. And then they asked her, because they said that her charge is terrorism and they wouldn't want her to be close to any place where there are Israelis after what happened on October 7th. So this is what they were saying. And so this is when Lama is also mentioning how these kinds of punishments are used against Palestinians to break their spirit. It's designed to humiliate them. It's designed to make them feel like they are dehumanized, and this is how they are treated with these forced labor punishments.
بخصوص جزئية السجن، يعني عمليا أنا قلت إنه في إبادة جماعية كمان تحصل في داخل السجون، وهذا كان واضح من أوائل أيام ما بعد 7 أكتوبر. تم الحكومة الإسرائيلية قامت باستهداف الأسرى بشكل مباشر، هذا واحد. 2، عملت على إدخال أعداد كبيرة من الفلسطينيين في داخل السجون لحتى تقدر تتحكم فيهم وتنتقم منهم. وبالتالي من لحظة 7 أكتوبر حتى هذه اللحظة، يعني إحنا عادة كان يكون في 4000 5000 أسير وأسيرة في السجون، هذا العدد النسبي اللي بيكون بشكل تقريبا دائم. ولكن ما بعد 7 أكتوبر اليوم في 11000 أسير وأسيرة في داخل سجون الاحتلال. هدول يمارس في حقهم، إذا بدك إحنا رجعنا لمرحلة ما قبل القرن الحديث، ما قبل القرون الوسطى، اللي هو استخدام أنواع التعذيب المباشر، الاغتصاب الجنسي، قيام وضع كلاب تقوم بفعل الاغتصاب اتجاه الأسرى، حتى الأسيرات. وأنا قريبة من الأسيرات ودائما أعمل مقابلات معهم. اليوم قابلت واحدة خرجت جديد. الأسيرات كمان بيتعرضوا لكل أنواع الإهانة الجسدية، التهديد بالضرب. أعداد كبيرة موجودة في منطقة جدا صغيرة، سجن الدامون صغير، ولكن في اليوم 95 أسيرة فلسطينية بيتعرضوا لكل أنواع الابتزاز الجسدي والجنسي والنفسي. فبالتالي فعلا هناك في إبادة جماعية داخل السجون تحصل منذ 7 أكتوبر بشكل ممنهج، ويشرف عليها وزير الأمن الداخلي الإسرائيلي إيتمار بن غفير، اللي هو بيحاول يطلع القانون من القضاء الإسرائيلي ويخلي القانون هو عبارة عن لعبة سياسية بيتحكم فيها بالطريقة اللي بتناسبه. قبل يوم هو شاف فيديو على التيك توك لمعلمة موجودة في الأراضي المحتلة بترقص في يوم 7 أكتوبر، فقام تحويل هذا الفيديو لأجهزة الشرطة، وقامت الشرطة باعتقالها وهي الآن موجودة في السجن. فهذا هو حقيقة ما يحصل اليوم في القدس وفي الداخل. إلى هذا المستوى يتم تكميم الأفواه، يتم إخراس الفلسطينيين وتخويفهم وترهيبهم. وفعلا يعني فعلا إذا بدي أكون صريحة ومباشرة، في حالة من الخوف الشديد وحالة من الردع الشديد اللي تم وضع الفلسطينيين فيها في هذه المناطق بالتحديد. قراءة منطقة الضفة الغربية مختلف تماما عن القدس وعن الداخل، والمعطيات الموجودة فيها مختلفة تماما.
Okay, thank you, Lama. So she was saying also it's important to say that the genocide has, not only occurred in Gaza or throughout Palestine, it also continues to happen within prisons. There is a systemic extermination of the bodies and souls of Palestinian prisoners, and all kinds of physical and psychological torture are being used on them. And this has also been intensified post-October 7. Lama also mentioned that initially the number of Palestinians in prisons would be between 4,000 to 5,000, but now we are talking about like 11,000 Palestinian prisoners who are again being subjected to the worst kinds of torture without any control or limit. It's like we are going back in time. Direct methods of torture and sexual violence are being used on the prisoners. Dogs are being unleashed on them as well. Even women, Lama is close to the women in Damoun prison. It's a small prison, but it has 95 women, and they are always being threatened, and sexual violence is being used against them in the worst ways. And she's also saying that this is also under direct supervision from Ben Gvir. He supervises this. Law is just used as like a playbook. He finds, for example, she mentioned the example of a teacher who filmed a TikTok dancing on October 7, and then he found her, and then she has been arrested and taken into prison. She also mentioned the point that the situation in the West Bank is different. She is talking specifically about Jerusalem and about the 48 areas.
Thank you so much, Lama. يعطيك العافية. I know that when people recount all these stories of violence, of repression, it's not easy. But we really thank you for being able to take something of you and share it with people and allow us to learn lessons from it. We have half an hour left, and we want to make sure that both our panelists, Rania and Dr. Abdullah, are able to respond to the. So we have several questions, some from the audience, and some I want. I'll just mention what are the things that I'd like, and we also have some of our colleagues, like both our colleagues, have questions. Rania, I was just hoping for if you can elaborate on the ways in which the Lebanese resistance and the Lebanese Palestinian working together and struggling, especially, and also now that this has a lot that has an impact on defeating and undermining the whole question of sectarianism in the region that Israel and the United States have been trying so much to build. If you could discuss that. And I know Akhila has a question for you. Akhila, do you want to raise the question, please? Are you in the back room or in your front room? Can you come to the front room? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm sorry. No, it's okay. The
That's
question was answered.
Oh, you were okay with that? The whole question of the media? You're good?
Well, okay. I can say
about the politics. You asked a question about the media. The politics was answered. Yeah.
the question I had was, we got a really amazing sense from Lama. Thank you all, by the way, for a very sobering conversation. But we got a sense from Lama what the experience of repression has been like for journalists in the West Bank and in Jerusalem. So I'm curious what repression has looked like for journalists in the international context as well.
Okay. Thank you. Before we move on, Laith, are there any questions for Rania on from the audience? Okay, go for it, Rania, and you have 10 minutes. Go ahead.
All right. So I'll start with the issue of sectarianism and the solidarity, or the collaboration, I should say, of Lebanese and Palestinian resistance. So let me, I guess, say first that in the 70s and 80s, there was Palestinian resistance and many various Lebanese leftist militias working together to fight against Israel's repeated invasions of Lebanon. And the invasions of Lebanon had to do with two things. It had to do with trying to steal and occupy Lebanese land, because we know that the Israelis have this vision of a greater Israel. And then the other aspect of Israel's repeated attacks on Lebanon was that many Palestinian refugees after 1948 were displaced into surrounding countries, waiting to go home. And Israel was not letting them go home. So they eventually formed resistance organizations that were trying to return to their homes and essentially fight the Israelis. And in Lebanon, the PLO was in Lebanon at one point and was a big resistance force towards the Israelis. And the Arab or the Lebanese leftist groups had their own formations and armed resistance organizations as well that were working with the Palestinians to fight the Israelis. And essentially the Americans and Israelis and the French intervened to push back against the leftist organizations and the Palestinians, which were also leftists at this time, and Arab nationalists, to basically suppress any resistance to Israel. And they did that by not just actively involving themselves militarily, but also arming fascist proxies in Lebanon. So if you heard what I was saying during my talk earlier, I mentioned the groups that the Israelis and the Americans are pushing to start a civil war in Lebanon today. The Lebanese forces and the Kataib, these are Christian fascist groups that historically, during the time period of the civil war throughout the 70s and 80s, were armed and funded and actively collaborated with the Israelis to snuff out all of this resistance that I'm talking about. And they eventually kind of did. They destroyed the Arab left in Lebanon, or the armed resistance form of it. They destroyed the Palestinian armed resistance briefly, kicked them out of the country. And then after kicking out the armed resistance and basically forcing them to put down their arms is when they committed the Sabra and Shatila massacres under the watchful eye and endorsement of the Israelis. And then it's in that context that the Lebanese of the South, who are mostly Shia, rose up and formed Hezbollah and pushed back against Israel's occupation of South Lebanon, which is just as brutal as Israel's occupation anywhere else on Arab land, including Palestine. And so all that's to say, to fast forward a bit to today, you have a very different Lebanon, though with similar sectarian divisions, but not necessarily the way it was in the 70s and 80s. The Christian fascist forces, which does not represent all Christians in Lebanon, I just want to clarify that, but those forces today are much weaker than they were back then, and Hezbollah as a resistance force, as well as its allies, are significantly stronger. Hezbollah is a Shia organization, and over the last, I should say 10 years as well, or maybe longer, the US and its Gulf state allies and the Israelis have been pursuing this anti-Shia sectarian campaign to try to basically turn the region against Hezbollah and against Iran by framing everything in the context of like the Shias are evil and they're coming to get you and these are your actual enemies. And for a period of time, it worked to an extent. It worked really well in Syria. And the US was arming and funding these Salafi jihadist organizations and telling the world that like Shias and evil Alawites were just like massacring and genociding Sunnis. And there was actually, as a result of Syria, a brief split between Hamas and Hezbollah, because Hamas is a predominantly Sunni organization. It's a Sunni Islamist resistance force, whereas Hezbollah is a Shia one. And so this did cause a rift because they were initially on different sides of the Syrian war that the Americans were totally backing, as well as the Israelis were involved and all the Gulf states. And that was a divide that did actually harm the resistance axis across the region. But I would say even before Israel's current genocide in Gaza, that had largely begun to be resolved to some extent. Hamas and Hezbollah sort of moved past that and became friends again. And the genocide in Gaza, I would push even further and say, if there was any of that sectarianism left, to the extent that that you're going to have like armed fights between Sunni and Shia across the region, it kind of put the nail in the coffin of that for now, because I think it's reminded the region who the real enemy is. And so you have a really united front with the resistance axis at this point, where you have Sunni groups. Even in Lebanon, you have a Sunni group, which is basically the Muslim Brotherhood branch in Lebanon, actively fighting and collaborating with Hezbollah. This would have been like unheard of 10 years ago at the peak of the sectarian violence between Sunnis and Shias that the US was like lighting a flame under. So I guess I would just say that there's a nail in the coffin for that for now. That doesn't mean it's over. But again, I think the genocide has reminded everybody who the actual enemy is. And that is not just Israel, but US imperialism, because between the two, they are currently basically bombing the entire region. And I hope that explains that question well enough for now, because it's a hard one to explain briefly. But just to touch on the question about journalism and the press and suppression internationally, I would say that we're watching in real time the media and the global North political figures that the media acts as a stenographer for, at least the English-speaking corporate media. I would say we're witnessing a kind of discrediting of them, because the corporate media and political leaders across the West have covered up the genocide and really gaslit all of us on Israel murdering journalists in Palestine and Lebanon, right? And just committing genocide. But the thing is, their propaganda, even though maybe it's worked in the past, this time around, because this is a live stream genocide, it doesn't match up to the images of reality that Palestinians on the ground, first and foremost, are bravely showing us. The genocide in Palestine, as a result, has really exposed the imperialist narrative of the mainstream media, and I would say even beyond Palestine. because it raises questions, right? Like if they lied about 40 beheaded babies, about the Hamas mass rape hoax, right? While actively ignoring the actual gang rapes of Palestinians by Israelis on video, if they're covering up Israel's use of the Hannibal Directive on October 7th and Israel's summary executions of doctors and patients in hospitals, if they're promoting Israel's fabrications about hospitals in Gaza being Hamas headquarters to justify dismantling Gaza's healthcare facilities, then what isn't the media lying about? And people see this, people get this. And that's why I think breakthrough news, like independent media, like the one I work for and other ones, we're constantly highlighting this, that if the media lies this much about Palestinians, perhaps they're lying about other adversary countries the US wants to destabilize, right? Like China and Iran and Venezuela. Or maybe they're even lying about what's happening in their own countries. So I would say Palestine is an inflection point that's permanently discrediting the corporate media to much of this generation. And that's why I'm just going to bring up breakthrough news one more time. But our whole thing is don't just hate the media, replace the media. And that's what we try to do. But of course, as a result, there is a lot of repression. First and foremost, the active and intentional killing of 170 journalists in Gaza. And there has been intentional killings of journalists in Lebanon as well. And then around the world, there's been the suppression and censorship of, social media accounts, of taking down websites, of taking down entire channels, of taking down YouTube pages. I don't know to what extent we can fight. I mean, we can fight this, but I don't know like the answer to how to, but I know that those conversations are happening. And I think that's really important because this is as much an information war as a hot war on the ground. There is a war over our minds right now happening in conjunction with this genocide. And it's the most insane thing I think any of us have ever seen, but everybody's brains are basically a part of the battleground. And that's another front in this war. And I think the suppression of media and of free press is going to get worse as the people who are carrying out this genocide are protested more and more. They're going to have no option but to realize that their narrative isn't actually working anymore. So they have to really like bring down the hammer, and we should all expect that.
Thank you so much, Rania. And I think this very much leads us to the questions for Dr. Abdullah. You started your discussion, Dr. Abdullah, talking about.
Sorry, real quick, Bob, before you get to that, I have to run because I have a live stream I have to do for
Oh,
Breakthrough.
yes,
But
yes,
I just want to thank
Good luck,
everybody
good luck.
for
Thank
giving
you.
me the opportunity to participate and speak. And good luck, you
Yeah,
guys. And
yeah.
thank you for
Good
all the
luck to
wonderful
you.
presentations.
Yeah, stay safe. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye, guys.
Yeah. So you started by talking about the U.S. war profiteers, and you connected the whole question of the economy with the question of war, with the destruction, and this is where Rania ended about the ways in which the multi-dominant media covers it, structural things and so on. But I also wanted to add a couple of things in which are very relevant and ask you to elaborate on them. But I wanted to say one thing. I was in North Carolina and I just came back, and there were stories about people who lost their homes, and the government is trying to actually charge them rent and telling them, if you don't pay rent, we have to evict you. They have no rent. And now in Florida, the military is telling people you have to sign a paper saying you insist to stay in your home and there is no place for them to go. And the government is unwilling to evacuate them. So it is just like the things that are being proposed to people is impossible. And everybody is saying, why are you sending these billions and billions of dollars to Israel to kill another people while this is, kind of like necessary here? But you discussed that. I want to actually talk about the whole question about the military collaboration, the military and the police collaboration in Cub City, in the killing, which still, until now, we do not have any case that has been cleared to actually indict the accusers, the people who have. We do not have any justice in the so-called criminal justice system. None of the police who have killed Black and brown people have been actually held accountable. The only thing we are hoping for is transformative justice, abolition changing the whole system together, and which is the same thing with Palestine, which is what Lama talked about, the ways that the incredible penalties that are being imposed by an unjust system. So I was wondering if you can actually like connect with these two issues together, and the ways in which the abolition and prisoner solidarity that is coming so much to the fore, and of course anything else you want to talk about, and also connected with the disciplinary acts that our universities are doing, and their refusal to support us as faculty, as students, including some, Dr. Kanikawa is asking, some of our comrades, our community comrades, some of our colleagues who are supposed to be very revolutionary and so on, but then they are completely silenced when some of us are attacked. So go ahead, please.
Thank you so much. That's a very full question, and I'm going to try to respond to all the parts of it. But I'll say that one of the things that we're moving is Stop Cop Nation. I hope folks know that, I think folks know about the Cop City in Atlanta, that we've been engaged in. Black Lives Matter Grassroots has been engaged in trying to stop Cop City in Atlanta, along with community movement builders, Movement for Black Lives, organizers like Queen Yonajaha, indigenous community, environmental activists. We know that one environmental activist was actually murdered as they tried to defend the forest defenders. And so we've been actively involved for a couple of years now in trying to stop Cop City in Atlanta. But the Cop City in Atlanta is one of 97 Cop cities that we know about that they're attempting to build all around this country, and it's all connected. So what's happening in Palestine, the genocide in Palestine, is connected to the building of Cop cities here, which is this militarized training ground for police, which are, U.S. police, but also their training grounds where Israeli military are both coming to be trained and to train. LAPD, we know if we look at LAPD, I live in Los Angeles, they do information and training exchanges with the Israeli occupation forces. So stopping Cop Nation is part of stopping the genocide. And so we want to encourage everybody to engage on October 22nd, which is our National Day to Stop Police Brutality. We're making it a Stop Cop Nation Day. I encouraged everybody, and I tried to go into the comments, but there's something with the StreamYard, and I'm not able to go into the comments. But if someone wants to drop it there, the website is stopcopnation.com, stopcopnation.com. One of the things that Comrade Rabab is bringing up is really important when we talk about budgets and talk about the spending of billions of dollars on the genocide in Palestine, but also billions of dollars to war. And if you look at the Pentagon budget, you're actually talking about trillions of dollars annually on the decimation of mostly people of color nations at the hands of the United States, and often in cahoots with other Western nations. Trillions of dollars spent. Well, we know that budgets are zero-sum games, that every dollar they spend on war, every dollar they spend on genocide is a dollar that they're not spending to help the people of North Carolina, to help the people of Florida. We have members who are in the midst of evacuating in Florida, or have just evacuated in Florida, and they're being offered nothing. When we talk about the dehumanization of the Palestinian people, remember there's the dehumanization of people, of Black people, indigenous people, poor people in this country as well. And that's what we're witnessing. So if we were to pull back, and I don't know if this website still exists, but during the Iraqi war, there used to be a website called costofwar.com, where they would say, for this amount has been spent on the war in Iraq, And for that amount, we could have done this. And we should think about it in those terms. When we think about now the many billions of dollars that was spent to arm Israel, we could have housed everyone in this country. We could have said there's universal housing. We could have said that there's not just health care for all, but health care justice. And so there are profiteers who are making money from both the war, but also from the catastrophes that come as a result domestically from us spending on war and not spending here. Think about what's happening with people. I watched a video because I get my news from where everybody gets their news, Instagram, right? I was watching as this young Black woman was told to evacuate in Florida. She has 6 kids and there are 3 adults in her household. And she was saying, where would I evacuate to? And then she said, I have nowhere to go. She's checked all of these hotels and the Airbnbs that were in safer areas of Florida, and the costs have risen to just astronomical rates. Not that she could have afforded the regular daily rate, but if you think about Hyatt and Hilton and Marriott and what they're profiting from these catastrophes, right? What the insurance companies, how they're profiting from catastrophe. If we think about not just the traditional war profiteers, like, the Boeings of the world, but also how that expands out and what we mean when we say the military industrial complex. We're not only talking about those who sell weapons of war and profit from the armament directly, but also everything that circles out from that. And so our fight back needs to be absolutely stop arming Israel. We have to say stop arming Israel, stop funding war, but also demand that those resources be used for the support of the people who are here and the people who've been harmed by the terrible things that the United States has done around the world.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah, and for packing so much in such a short time. Our time is coming to a close. So I would like to ask Rania already said goodbye, and we haven't heard back from Dr. Abu Sitte. I'm assuming we will hear later on reports, hopefully not too bad of a news. So we would like maybe Lama, maybe a couple of minutes closing statement, and then we will go actually, or maybe we should ask our colleagues here, Dr. Anat and Dr. Kinakawa, if you have anything to add, and Laith and Lean, and I'll wait on you to see if you have something, and I'll go with Lama because you're already in the screen. So go ahead, Lama. Any closing words, any final statements?
بقول إنه قد يبدو لنا إحنا كفلسطينيين إنه إحنا هلأ في مرحلة شديدة الظلمة أو شديدة الرمادية، ولكن لو اطلعنا هيك من بعيد، من عدسة بعيدة على تاريخ القضية الفلسطينية والأحداث التي تمر بها القضية الفلسطينية، بنستنتج إنه إحنا في الذروة اللي يعني ينكشف فيها حقيقة المستعمر، وبالتالي هو يلجأ إلى أقصى درجات استخدام العنف، وهذا اللي ظاهر من خلال الحرب الجارية في قطاع غزة، أو أيضا ما يحصل في الضفة الغربية، وأيضا في لبنان الآن، ولربما لاحقا في مناطق أخرى في العالم العربي. فهذا إن دل على شيء، يعني عمليا في الوقت الحالي إحنا نشعر بقمة الظلم، بقمة اليأس أحيانا، ولكن هناك من ناحية أخرى جانب آخر للمشهد، ألا وهو طاعة أن تبقى حتى هذه اللحظة. ثانيا بأن لجوء الاستعمار الاستيطاني الإسرائيلي لهذا الكم الهائل من العنف المباشر وأقصى درجات الاستهداف للوجود الفلسطيني ولاحقا الوجود العربي الداعم للوجود الفلسطيني، هذا إن دل على شيء يدل بأن هذا العدو يشعر بأن هناك استهداف وجودي لكل كينونته ولكل منظومته، وبالتالي لذلك هو يعني يكشف ويعري كل المخالب وكل الجبروت الظالم الموجود فيه من خلال اعتماده على تنفيذ كل الأدوات الاستعمارية والأدوات العقابية والأدوات الإبادية للقضاء على القضية الفلسطينية والقضاء على الوجود الفلسطيني. ولكن ما يعزينا بأنه هذا إن دل على شيء يدل على صمودنا وثباتنا وفعالية وجودنا. وأيضا يعني أحب أن أقول بأنه كل إنسان اليوم يجب أن يكون صوت للقضية الفلسطينية، كل إنسان يجب أن يحاكم ضميره للحديث بصوت عالي وواضح عن القضية الفلسطينية وكسر كل جدران العزل حول العالم وكشف وتعرية هذا النوع من النظام الاستعماري الأبشع في القرن الحديث. وهذا يعني ابتداء من مسؤوليتي الفردية مثلا أنا كشخص إلى مسؤوليتنا الجمعية كفلسطينيين كناشطين وأصحاب يعني آراء حرة وأفعال حرة حول الوطن العربي وحول العالم أجمع.
شكرا. Lean, you will translate and then we move to Dr. Abdullah.
Okay, thank you, Lama. So Lama's saying despite how it's looking now, it's very dark. But if we zoom out, we see that we are at a peak where the truth of the colonizer is bare to see and is visible for everybody. Everyone is seeing the violence of the colonizer, which is Israel in this case. We are seeing their violence in Gaza, in Lebanon, in many other areas maybe soon. So this level of violence or their use of this much violence shows that they know that they are facing an existential threat, or that they feel that they are facing an existential threat as a colonizer. And this is why they are resorting to using all the tools at their disposal, like genocide, targeting people, imprisoning Palestinians, doing everything they can to erase Palestine, to erase Palestinians. But what's important to understand is that now we all have a responsibility as individuals and as a collective to be the voice and to be vocal about what's happening and to expose the truth of the colonizer. So this is a summary of what Lama mentioned. Thank you, Lama.
Thank you so much. I know that Dr. Kinakawa went to teach, and Dr. Anand said, nothing to add from me. I learned so much and appreciate all the knowledge and inspiration shared here. Before I pass it on to Dr. Abdullah, I wanted to say that I wanted to thank everybody who made this possible, our amazing panelists who had bestowed so much wisdom in a very short time on us and raised important issues here. All the participants, all the organizers of it, everybody who have watched and listened. And sorry to say, from Lean, who got the information that we have so far now in the attack in Lebanon that Dr. Ghassan Abu Sitta went to help in. There are 18 martyrs and 92 injured so far. So this is the reality. This is what we're facing every day, and this is what we need to stand up for. And Dr. Abdullah, would you please close us off? And respond to whatever you're closing and close us off. Yeah.
Thank you again for convening us. I don't have very much to add other than we must continue to resist. We must continue to resist. We must stand with each other. We must stand with our students who are the most courageous among us. We must stand with our martyrs. We must honor them by continuing their quest for justice. And so we have to do the righteous work that we're called to do. And I think that I know in the midst of a genocide, it feels strange to talk about opportunity, but I think we do have an opportunity to exercise an unprecedented solidarity and in our resistance. And so I want to pledge that for myself, for the movement that I'm a part of, and I'm honored to be among you. Again, thank you so much for inviting me and for all of your tremendous work.
Thank you so much, Dr. Abdullah. Thank you, everybody. Until we meet again, we ask you to please post any comments, any assessment, any issues you'd like to know more about. This video will continue being available on YouTube, on all the channels of all the groups who participated. We hope you join us again, and we hope that everybody follows the call by Lama that let's talk about our own selves, our communities, wherever we are. Let's fight for hope, for justice for all, and let's stop the killing machines and world profiteering, as Dr. Abdullah has called us to do. And have a very good day.